Hey, happy Monday. Um, I hope that everyone had a good weekend and, of course, wanted to send love and prayers to those in Texas who are still being affected by the storm. Um, Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about communication. Now, we've been talking about our internal conversations and our patterns over the past few weeks, especially our internal patterns around these narratives and our internal response mechanisms. But it occurred to me, it's been coming up a lot, that this topic of being responsible for our communication is something that would be a valuable topic. So the statement that I'm going to make for us to ponder on today is one that I teach in my NLP certification class. And it's one that I often come back to because it is so relevant every single day of my life inside of communicating with others. And that statement is the meaning of the communication is the response that you get. All right. So what does that even mean when I say something like that? Well, let me give you an example. So many of you know by now that I do a lot of work in the space, the anti-racism space. And I do, with a partner of mine, Dr. Joe Wiener, we do corporate anti-racism trainings. So a couple of weeks ago, we were doing our run through as we typically do before a training, making sure that all of our logistics were taken care of and our timing is taken care of. And we came to a part where I was explaining to her how I was going to do a particular section. And as I was explaining it to her, there was this confusion that came up for her. And so she was feeding back to me, well, I think we should do it this way. And what if you include this? When in fact, that was kind of what I was saying. So then I would try to say it a different way. This is behavioral flexibility, by the way, right? There are no inflexible people. There are only fixed communicators. So it's some of these principles. I'm always bringing these principles into my communication. So she's feeding me back, some feedback. Well, I think we should do it this way. And what if you include this? And so I went to explain to her again, well, this is the way I'm going to do it, which is kind of what she was saying. And she was very confused. And so I had to pull back, and I actually said it out loud to her. Okay, the meaning of the communication is the response that you get. And if the response you're getting is confusion, if the response I'm getting is confusion, then perhaps the way I'm saying this to you is confusing you, right? And so I took a step back and looked at how was I communicating in a way that was confusing, that was occurring to her like confusing, even though for me, it felt very clear. I felt like I was very clear in my communication, right? I felt like, well, how can she not get it, right? And she was responding in confusion. So if the meaning of the communication is the response that you get, then there's some responsibility to be taken inside of our communication. So when I backed up and I said, okay, let me break it down to you step by step. And I reworded the communication. I slowed it down. I recreated what she had said as this is exactly what I mean by that. And once I did that, she got it. She got, oh, we were saying the same thing the entire time, right? And so what I did was I became responsible for the way my communication landed to her in that instance. And you could take the case that if we were to do this on a regular basis, we would resolve so much conflict instantly. We would avoid so much conflict instantly, because oftentimes I've talked about this in previous videos, but we all have different models of the world. We all have different ways that we listen, different ways that we process. Some people take longer to process communication. Some people have to step back and think about it. And I know that I'm one of those people. When someone says something to me or reveals something to me, I have to take a moment to actually allow myself to process that before I can come back to a response. And so another instance that happened just over the weekend is I was having lunch with a friend, or I would say an acquaintance. To me it was like a business networking lunch, and there was and it was a wonderful lunch, and this person expressed a particular interest in me, and I didn't catch it in the moment until later. And so in my mind, I had to think about, well, was there something in my communication that led this person to think that our relationship would be anything other than business? And as it turns out, I had to give a communication to this person and clear things up, right? So I had to be responsible for the communication, verbal and nonverbal. Now, that's not to say people are not going to misinterpret things in general anyway, right? No, if we break things down and people hear what they want to hear, that happens. That's still going to happen, right? We can count on it. However, the more we can be responsible for our speaking, the more we can be responsible for our communication and be clear about our communication and our intention, verbal and nonverbal, the less conflict, the less misunderstanding, the less confusion there will be in our relationships. And I'm a type of person myself. I grew up in a household where we didn't do a lot of hints or or what do you call that? You call that beating around the bush type of communication. My mother was very direct in her communication, and so I miss hints. Unless someone says something very specific to me about their intention or their communication, I will miss the hint. I'm very clear about that about myself. So I speak clearly as I possibly can, and sometimes I understand that I'm very animated and I'm very much I'm a very friendly person, and so sometimes that can get miscommunicated as well. So the meaning of the communication is the response that you get. How can you then begin to take responsibility for your communication, being clear, giving a clear understanding of what your intentions are, giving a clear understanding of what you are experiencing on the inside, or giving a clear understanding of a direction. My son told me, and I thought this was really great, last night. He says, "Mommy, I have to tell you something." He says, sometimes when you give me 2 and 3 directions at a time, it really makes my brain jumbled up and I get all confused, and I just get so frustrated. This is my 6-year-old, by the way, that's telling me this. So he says, so can you, when you want me to do something, if you want me to do a lot of things, can you just tell me to do one thing at a time? So that was a very clear communication. And then I had to be responsible for when he gets upset. If I'm telling him to do multiple things, well, that's probably the reason why, right? Because in his mind, he can process one thing at a time, and now he can clearly communicate that that's what he wants. So this not only applies with work, it applies with parenting, it applies with friendships, it applies with relationships, it applies with conflict, it applies with anything, with business. And so I want you to take away from that is when you're talking to someone and you get a particular response, before you react to their reaction, because that's what basically we tend to do, is people react and then we react to their reaction, is to take a step back and really ask yourself, well, if the meaning of the communication is the response that I get, and the response I am getting is this, how might I have communicated in a way that would have landed that way? Was it the tone of my voice? Was it the words that came out of my mouth? Was it my facial expression? Was it my body language? Because remember, only 7% of communication is actually in words, and the rest is nonverbal. Facial expression and body language and tone of voice and cadence and all of those things, right? So if you don't know how much you're communicating, if you're not aware how much you're communicating without your voice. And so you want to ask yourself, well, how might I have communicated this in a way that landed to eject the response that I got? Now, sometimes the response you get has nothing to do with you, and you always want to remember that as well, right? So I like to ask, rather than trying to people please and fix my communication before I even know. I like to ask, well, if you're getting a response or reaction that is out of congruence or out of alignment with what you're actually expressing to the other person, especially if it's an exaggerated response, you might ask, what's going on over there with you? What is it that's going on, right? And I've done that before, like, oh, I hear that you feel irritated, or you sound like you're frustrated. Is everything okay? And then you can get whether or not it's in response to what you said, or they're dealing with something else completely, because then, you can sort of take the pressure off that it's necessarily your communication. And I think that's important to remember as well, is that when there is a response that is outside of congruence with what you're communicating with that person, or exaggerated response or reaction, just pull back and ask what's going on. And you also want to ask the other question, well, how am I communicating that could have landed this way? And you can even ask that question. Well, you sound XYZ, irritated or disappointed. What is it that I said or didn't say that had that land in that way? And sometimes they'll tell you, oh, well, when you said it like this, or your voice was kind of this, forceful, or it sounded like you were yelling at me, or you were scolding me, or maybe they was like, well, I was expecting this, and then this happened. Maybe it's a relief response, and you're like, well, what was that reaction? So it doesn't always have to be negative, but a lot of times the reason I use those kinds of examples is because a lot of times when we're reacting to something, it typically is in conflict, or it's in a negative response, and so that's a lot of times what we focus on. So just remember those things: the meaning of the response, the meaning of the communication is the response that you get. How could you be communicating verbal or nonverbal in a way that would have your communication land in that way? And not all responses and reactions are related to the communication itself. And so it's always good to ask. It's always good to name what you're experiencing with the other person. And a lot of times when you name it, when you put it out in the space, it makes a person aware, and they will either confirm or deny that is a response, right? They'll confirm, oh yeah, you know what, I didn't mean to, or they'll say, oh, yeah, I'm angry because blah, 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 blah. Or yeah, I'm frustrated, or yeah, I'm sad, right? So it's always good to name what you're experiencing. And sometimes that can be hard for people who may be a little bit conflict fearful, that it's going to produce conflict. But you'd be surprised at how naming the experience, I feel attacked. And remember to use I words. I feel attacked. I feel like you're frustrated. Or it sounds to me like, or I'm getting this energy of. Like, those are some phrases that you can use. And when you pull it into the space what you're experiencing from them, sometimes they're not even aware of it. And then you can resolve, you can avoid a conflict. You can get the pressure off of you of whatever those emotions you're feeling, or it could be confirmed and talked out. Because in my world, and what I teach in this world of neurolinguistic programming, everything can be resolved in communication. Most things, not everything. I try to stay away from absolutes, but most things can be resolved in communication. And the problem is that we either do not communicate, or we do not listen to understand, right? So there's always this missed communication. And we don't step into the fact that people listen differently, people process differently. We expect people to listen to us or process in the way that we process. And so as we begin to, I'll talk more about communication in different videos and different lives, but as you begin to get an awareness of these things, that these things are running around in the background of our minds and in other people's minds, it gives you a little bit more freedom inside of your interactions with others. And it takes the pressure off of you having to, of you feeling like there's something wrong with your communication. There's something wrong inside of the interaction, something that you're doing, and having the burden, because being at the source of your communication and being responsible for how it lands is not the same thing as having it be a burden. You just have to really dig in and communicate with the other person and ask the other person what's going on with them so you can clear things up. So I would love to hear your questions, your feedback, your experiences of if you've done this before, if you have, and actually between now and the next time that we chat, which will be on Thursday, I would love to hear you putting this into practice. Put it into practice, and I would love to hear how it goes for you. Now, I always say that, and I hardly ever get a response, which is expected, but I would love to hear, like, really, how's it going? Do you ever put these things in practice? Because I know this is 15 minutes, 20 minutes that I've shared this little tidbit, and it's good information. But the truth is, if you never put this stuff into practice, then it doesn't really matter. It's just information. And I'm not really here spending this time on these lives just to see myself on a screen and to just give away information that'll never be used. I do it because I'm hoping that this will impact someone's life. I'm hoping that you'll actually put some of these principles into practice and see a result, right? And maybe you'll get even more interested in deepening your personal development in this way. Whether you do it with me or whether you do it with someone else, I don't care. I just really want to begin to help people to understand more deeply that our unconscious minds are very powerful, and they really run everything. They run our communication, they run our responses, they run our view of the world. And if bit by bit I can begin to dismantle that in these little 20-minute segments, then hey, I love that. And of course, if you choose to do deeper work with me, you know how to get in touch with me. I always say it at the end of the videos. The link is in the bio. You can always reach out to me directly on Instagram, or you can go to remapmymind.com and schedule a free call with me. I do webinars. You'll see webinars there. There's all kinds of ways if you want to continue to do that deep work with me or explore learning these tools. But the point is, get into action. This is great information, but it doesn't do a damn bit of good if you don't get into action and apply it in your relationships, apply it with work, apply it with the people in your life. Okay? So I'm off my soapbox now. That's all I wanted to say today. I just wanted to empower you in your communication with people, with others, especially as we're in this pandemic and people may be still working from home, close in quarantine. We're communicating with people on screens, which means it's a lot harder to read the energy of a person. So you have to have much more sensory acuity or observation skills. And part of that is listening skills. And part of that is the willingness to speak when something doesn't feel aligned in the response. So if you're coming in at the end of the video, I'm going to put it in IGTV so you can watch the whole thing if you want to. And I do want to hear your responses about how you're applying this in your life, because like I said, it's time to be in action, people. And if you want to do deeper work with me, you know where to find me. So you guys have a great rest of the day and a great rest of the week. I will be back on Thursday. And I can never remember what I'm talking about from week to week. I just look on the calendar, so it'll be posted. Stay tuned. You guys have a great one. Namaste.